Chapter 24 of Psychopomp Drive. Written by Janeen Leese-Taylor. Read aloud by SkyAsimaru. Chapter 24 The Joyless Hunt. Finley traced his hands along the invisible outline of the shield, checking for anything that felt like a border or an opening. Abigail did the same, copying his motions on the opposite side of the barrier. She shook her head, letting both arms drop by her sides in defeat.
"Badgers!"
she swore.
"No luck! What about the other side?"
Finley turned around and extended his hand in the opposite direction. He was only able to take a few steps before he reached another barrier. He moved again and found a third solid wall. But when he reached for the final space that might have boxed him in, his hand met empty air.
Looks like I've been left a way out. What about you?"
The other Amarini traced the lines of her own invisible cage.
"Mine has an opening this way,"
she said, and her brows furrowed in concern as she glanced back at him over one shoulder.
"Oh, I don't like this, Finn. It feels like it's leading us in opposite directions."
Finley ran a hand through his light-colored hair and swiveled to examine the rest of the space. The other Amarini had had the same thought and were cautiously spreading out in all directions, hands out in search of other barriers.
"What choice do we have?"
he asked her.
"If this is another one of their trials, all we have to do is find the answer, right? We won't be apart for long."
She sighed and reached up to tighten her ponytail, a determined expression falling over her pale features.
"You're all right,"
she agreed.
"But if anything jumps out at me, I'm gonna stab it."
She pulled her spear out from its holster for emphasis. Finley chuckled and reached up for his reaper as well, watching the purple glow wash over his hands in the darkness.
"Good luck, Abby."
She nodded back at him, a sharp smile spreading across her feminine features.
"As my dad always says, long may your lum reek," she replied,
imitating a rough Glaswegian accent.
"Apologies if it's something rude. I never did get a full translation from the old guy."
The silver-haired man waved over his shoulder as they parted, and he pulled Sassy in close to his chest, using his free hand to check for the clear boundaries of the maze around him. The room they were in was dark, and he took small steps to avoid tripping over any unseen obstacles. Though the eyes granted him by the grim certainly helped with seeing more clearly in the dark, it didn't do much for seeing the invisible. Finley hesitated as the final turn took him towards a tall red door. Dark text was scrawled across it from one side to the other, the inky letters dripping down the curved pattern in the wood.
"Well, isn't that ominous?"
he remarked. It was hard to tell if the text was a warning or simply instructions for what lay ahead. He reached outwards to take a hold of the handle, pushing the door forward and entering carefully. Beyond him was a wall of solid gray stone, with an immediate sharp turn to the right. On either side of him as he progressed were more strange characters, bizarre shapes that even Google Translate would have struggled to decipher. Finley leaned closer to inspect the characters under the glow of his reaper.
Any idea what language this is?
He asked her. The weapon in his hands flickered thoughtfully.
If I were to hazard a guess, I would say it was something Indo-European, like ancient Greek, judging by the shape of those letters.
I don't suppose you have any idea what they mean.
Not a clue, I'm afraid,
Sassy answered.
I was born and raised in Leeds. The closest to the Mediterranean I've ever come is having euros at the world market.
Finley traced the first letter with one hand and froze as a vibration traveled up through his fingertips. A jolt of adrenaline rushed through him as darkness fell over the board, and he held his breath as he turned, meeting the eyes of a large, muscular creature with thick brown fur. 2 white enamel horns created points on either side of its head, and a gold ring hung limp and heavy from his nostrils. The beast's lips pulled back to reveal the flat rows of heavy molars laid into his jaw like brickwork.
"Hello, little kitty,"
the monster growled, his voice as deep as the pit they had tumbled into.
"I'll give you a 30-second head start, 'cause I'm feeling generous today."
Finley's ears shot straight up.
Wait, what?
30, 29, 28.
The creature counted, the smile never leaving its bullish face.
Finley, run!
Sassy shouted, and he turned and sprinted, bounding through the quick, intricate turns of the corridors, his shoulders cracking off the stone corners when he moved too quickly. He panted, bracing himself against the walls before pushing off them again, head spinning as he tried his best to memorize all the previous turns he had taken.
It's a labyrinth,
he realized, his breath heavy as he moved into the next turn.
That thing is chasing me deeper inside. I need to find a way back to where I was.
Finley, above you! Look!
As he peered upwards, a twinkling orb of light caught his attention. Suspended in the air, the shining stone looked to be just within arm's reach. He leapt up for it, sealing his hand around the circular gem. And when he landed, he was somewhere else entirely. He blinked, momentarily disorientated, as he faced the doorway of a familiar flat, with filthy brown floors and peeling wallpaper. Taken aback, his eyes scanned the cramped living room, the mess of blankets on the sofa, the takeout containers stacked by the TV where an old washing machine was being used as a makeshift table. "You didn't come home last night." He turned abruptly at the voice he had known since he was 13 years old. Thorne stood by the doorframe, younger than she was now. Her hair dyed a mixture of green and blue that he hadn't even remembered until now. She was holding 2 full bags of shopping, the orange carriers threatening to burst.
No, I didn't.
When Finley turned again, he saw himself, alive and blonde and flushed with blood heat. He hadn't seen his own face like that in months. He looked angrier than he remembered. His dark eyebrows dipped downwards as he motioned with his hands.
"What are you doing carrying all that crap by yourself?" he demanded. "You're going to hurt yourself."
"So?" the young Thorne grunted. heaving the bags up onto the counter of the small two-seater kitchen table. "It's not like you care." It was then that Finley realized what this was, and took a step back through the tiny living space. He shook his head as if the movement might scatter the memories again.
"This was our first real fight," he said, watching the two shapes moving into the kitchen. Their faces were so close when they shouted at each other, hurt feelings pouring out like blood from old wounds. "I was a total dick to her that night, and she'd just come off a 24-hour shift at the hospital," he continued, speaking aloud to no one in particular. "She was working as a cleaner in the emergency room, cleaning up blood and sick all night, and I had gone out and gotten drunk with money we didn't have. Had slept rough because I was too ashamed to face her, but that only made her worry."
No one lives a perfect life,
Sassy reminded him.
"This is all in the past now."
"Why am I seeing this?"
he asked her, squeezing his eyes tightly shut.
"Because it hurts,"
she answered him. He staggered and fell forward, his hands finding the cold stone surface of the maze again. As the light cleared away, there was a hollow emptiness in his chest, a feeling that mixed longing and pain, and he felt like his throat might close over.
"What is this challenge?"
he rasped. Behind them, a gate fell and blocked the path, decorated with vines and bright baby pink flowers. It was as tall as the beast had been, the path beyond concealed by the foliage.
"If you choose to see the memories that hurt you the most, the labyrinth will protect you from the monster,"
Sassy explained.
"If instead you choose to ignore those memories, the monster will be all the more difficult to evade."
"Then we have to keep moving,"
Finley said, as he carried on through the dark, enclosed space, hands extending for balance as he skidded around each new bend. He could still hear the Minotaur's booming breaths behind him, like it was only a few footfalls away at all times. When he saw the light looming just ahead of him this time, he was hesitant to touch it. Which of his other memories had been chosen to break down his walls? Were there moments he had forgotten in his life where he hadn't been a good man, a good friend, a good boyfriend? Times where he had been young and stupid. Feelings he had long since buried under years of other memories.
"You can do this,"
Sassy encouraged, her blade humming with energy. He took a deep breath in and stretched up towards the light, his fingertips disappearing behind the edges of its white glow. This time, the orb teleported him to a quiet park in the center of Chester. It was one that had been the epicenter of some of his most treasured memories. He and Thorn had had picnics here, taken pictures of the local dog population, tossed bread for the ducks. He knew now that it would not be one of these pleasant memories he would see. When he heard the screams, he knew exactly when he had appeared. The incident had happened in April 4 years earlier. He could still recall the exact date when asked how the cherry blossoms had looked on the trees, the color of the shirts each person had been wearing. It was funny how the human mind worked. The less he wanted to remember it, the more his mind would latch onto every little detail, sealing it in stone and committing it to his person as deeply as a scar. The homeless man's screams had haunted his dreams for months. He'd had therapy for it. It had taken the man less than 2 minutes to die, but it had felt like an eternity. Finley turned to face him again, that phantom from his nightmares, and it all came rushing back with such clarity that it made him stagger. The way his dark skin glistened, doused with some sort of accelerant, his bright orange sleeping bag tangled around his legs. He swatted at the air, flailed, and wept and begged. Across from him, 3 teenage boys were laughing. He remembered them in both their forms. The devils who had lit the man alight, and the frightened children that had appeared in handcuffs in a courthouse. They had rich parents, people linked to the horses, and got off with a slap on the wrist and a fine that would have barely touched their family's fortunes. The victim, a man named Benjamin Harper, was revealed to have been targeted for his skin color as much as for his homelessness. It was a hate crime, the likes of which the small English city hadn't seen for years. His family were given his ashes in a plastic Sainsbury's bag. As Finley stood before the burning man again, he could see Elisha's face next to his own, dressed in a raggedy green shirt and corduroy trousers the color of bark. He looked less worn down then, the signs of living on the street not yet showing on his skin. The glow of the fire washed over him, reflecting in his tears. Benjamin had been a friend, a good man. He could have been a great man, except 3 stupid kids had killed him for shock value on a video sharing site, live streamed for the whole world to see. A human being condensed down to the 2 worst minutes of his life. Next to him, the 26-year-old version of himself was screaming down the phone for an ambulance that wouldn't arrive in time. His throat was hoarse, tears streaming down his face. This Finley's nightmares were only just beginning. The Amarini blinked, and he was back in the labyrinth, the next barricade erecting at his back, shaking loose dust from the walls surrounding him as it rose from the grating in the floor.
Finn, do you want to talk about it?
No, the spirit answered, and took off running again. He could see the lights ahead of him, their glowing presence leading him towards the exit. The sound of bone on metal rang out from behind him as the Minotaur smashed against the gate, and he picked up speed, panting breathlessly as his doll struggled to keep the pace. His vision blurred with tears, and he swiped upwards with the side of his hand, sniffing harshly and clenching his teeth. When he first came to Psychopomp Drive, all he had remembered were the good times, the memories of his friends and family, of Thorn and their life together. But the living world wasn't perfect. It was full of pain and hurt. Those who committed the evilest acts against each other for reasons that would never matter. There was starvation, suffering, and above it all the looming promise of death, never knowing when a loved one would be swept away from you forever. It was an inevitability best kept out of one's mind, the elephant forever looming in the corner of every room. There were no tearful goodbyes, no final heartfelt wishes, no time to savor those little moments that he had taken for granted. Just poof, and it was over. Curtains closed. No intermission. No Act 2. He stopped, his chest heaving as he came to an opening. Blocking the path was one final orb, one last memory. He wiped at his eyes again, and when he looked at his hand, he realized he was trembling. It was such a human reaction that it startled him for a moment to see it. Since being reborn in the body of the doll, normal human functions had completely ceased. Although he could still eat and drink, the doll used any energy without wastage, so there were no more bathroom trips. Even though he could feel out of breath, the sensation came from a lack of energy and not from having actual lungs in his chest. Feelings like this one, he had almost forgotten what they were like.
Finn, we have to go! That monster is still in there!
Sassy urged. He balled his hand into a fist and walked towards the final light, reaching out to take it one last time. "Show me," he commanded, and the room began to glow and then vanish. When he opened his eyes again, he didn't immediately recognize where he was. There were trees and areas of grass and wildflowers. Birds were singing over them, dancing in a cloudless blue sky. The sounds of voices behind him drew his attention, and he moved around the trees and felt his whole body freeze in place. Amongst the flowers were the dark gray forms of gravestones. Each grave had been freshly dug, their offerings newly cut and in full bloom for the mourning families. He shook his head, knowing instinctually what was being shown to him. "Oh, please," he breathed, stepping backwards and away from the scene. "Not this! Please don't show me this!" The group surrounding the open graveside were bowing their heads in prayer as a young woman stood at the stone, her hand caressing the curved edge of it as she spoke. The sunlight caught in her pink highlights like she was the very personification of her namesake. In her hand was a sheet of poetry, the page damp with her tears as she took shallow breaths to steady herself. "All my life's buried here." She swallowed and squeezed the corners of her pages, determined to hold in her pain. "Heap earth upon it." Ever since secondary school, Oscar Wilde had made her cry. She said his words were as raw and as beautiful as the human heart itself. Their shared home library proudly displayed collections of his work, the corners dog-eared and flattened again with love. Their words recited and memorized again and again and again. When the last words had left her mouth, Thorn collapsed into his mother's arms, as weak and as frail as a porcelain doll. She wailed openly when they buried him, clinging to those around her with deep fistfuls of hurt and anguish. As Finley watched her from a distance, his whole body ached to hold her. "Please," he whispered aloud to anyone that would listen, as he buried his face in his hands. "Please, please don't make me see her like this." The world vanished in an instant, and he was surrounded one last time in gray and golden stone. A shadow loomed over him again, but this time he chose not to run. "Is this what you wanted?" Finley asked the creature, as he sank slowly to the floor. "Are you happy now?" "I'm sorry," a voice said softly over him. He felt a very human hand touch his shoulder, and finally twisted to meet the beast's gaze. No longer bathed in shadow, the animal was all soft lines and fur now. Huge dark eyes, just like its earthly counterpart. "It is the only way to enter the kingdom of Hades." Finley sniffed as he took in the details of the creature's expression. "You're not even a real monster, are you?" The Minotaur gave him a small, sad smile and shook his head. "I'm just another guardian," he admitted. "I'm sorry that we tricked you." "The others?" Finley started, peeling himself up off the stone floor. "Did they also—" "I am afraid that the only way to get inside is by finishing all 3 of the challenges," the creature explained. "You have already completed the burning coals and the joyless hunt. Now all that remains is the lament." Green eyes dipped towards the ground. "I'm not sure I can go through that again." "That girl, the one from your memories?" the Minotaur questioned. "She's still alive, isn't she?" Finley lifted his head again, his ears perking upwards in surprise. "Yes, she is."
"Then I assume whatever you have come here to do will protect her, yes?" the bull-headed man pressed. "She's counting on you."
Finley let out a tired but amused exhale through his nose.
"No rest for the wicked," he noted. "No, I am afraid not,"
the beast said, and offered him a hand, helping him to get to his feet again. Finley slipped his reaper into the holster again and dusted himself down.
"Thanks for not killing me,"
he said, giving the beast a small smile. His tail drew an S shape in the air behind his back. The Minotaur laughed and extended a hand.
"I'm Arsenio,"
he said.
"Finley Evans,"
the Amarini replied, and grasped the man's hand tightly in his own.
"Well, Finley Evans, I wish you luck in the final challenge. El piso naese nikitis. And say hi to the big man for me."
To be continued in Chapter 25.